There's a lot of controversy swirling around presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over several remarks he made recently. The first was about certain races being more or less susceptible to COVID. We're going to go into details about his comments and the reaction from many who mischaracterized and smeared him by calling him anti-Semitic. But then shortly after, whether he was overcorrecting or whether he was being genuine, in an interview with Rabbi Shmuley, Kennedy proudly proclaimed his unwavering support for Israel, seemed to disregard Palestinians, and called certain people who criticize Israel, like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, anti-Semitic. This obviously has a lot of his supporters thinking twice, and we're going to go into more detail about all of it. So let's start off with the comment that he made that caused the big controversy, headlines swirling around, people coming out condemning him, his own sister coming out and condemning him and his comments. So he was at a fundraiser in New York City. This was last Tuesday. During the dinner, the topic of bioweapons was brought up, and Kennedy made a reference to a Cleveland Clinic study that concluded that Blacks and Caucasians seem to have been most affected by COVID more than other races, and that Ashkenazi Jews, Chinese, and Finns were the least affected by COVID. Let's just watch him actually making the comment at the dinner for ourselves. Here it is.
And we need to talk about bioweapons. The level, I know a lot now about bioweapons because I've been doing a book on it for the past 2.5 years, and you know, the technology that we now have to develop these microbes. We've put hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there's an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacked certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are because of the structure of the genetic structure, genetic differentials among different races of the receptors of the ACE2 receptor. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. But we don't know whether it was deliberately targeted that or not. But there are papers out there that show the racial and ethnic differential and impact to that. We do know that the Chinese are spending hundreds of millions of dollars developing ethnic bioweapons, and we are developing ethnic bioweapons. That's what all of those labs in the Ukraine are about. They're collecting Russian DNA, they're collecting Chinese DNA, so that we can target people by race.
Okay, so obviously he's saying that, you know, when they looked at COVID, they found that it seemed to, because of the way certain parts of it just seemed to latch on to certain races, the genetics to certain races over others. This comment just blew up, and people were calling him anti-Semitic. The New York Post came out with this article. RFK Jr. says COVID may have been ethnically targeted to spare Jews. So he didn't say that. You know, in the dinner, the clip that you just watched, he did not say, oh, it looked like it was developed to spare Jews. He was just saying that the COVID virus did seem to like certain Caucasians and Blacks more so, and it more so than Chinese and Ashkenazi Jews. He also mentions later on Finns as well. That is not saying that COVID-19 was developed to do that. It's just showing that it could be developed. Bioweapons could be created that could target certain races, because there is an ability to do this when it comes to, you know, and he's showing that COVID as a showcasing of this ability, that whether COVID was made in a lab, which many of us think it was, or whether it was developed naturally, you know, just from somebody eating a bat in a Chinese wet market, whatever the reason might be, the virus itself seems to latch on to certain genetics over others. And that means that you could then, you could do some manipulation, and you could do gain of function research, essentially, that could then have that have that ability. And that is actually quite frightening. That's what a bioweapon would be. Obviously, if you're going to create a bioweapon, if you're that sinister monster behind the curtain that's going to be doing something like that, you would want it to target other people and not yourself. So if you're at war with another country of a different ethnicity, then maybe you would be the sinister, Machiavellian type person that would go and create that type of virus or that type of bioweapon. So, you got New York Post saying RFK Jr. says COVID may have been ethnically targeted to spare Jews. You've got New York Times saying Robert F. Kennedy Jr. airs bigoted new COVID conspiracy theory about Jews and Chinese. CNN says Jewish groups denounce RFK Jr.'s false remarks that COVID-19 was ethnically targeted to spare Jews and Chinese people. As I mentioned, his own sister came out condemning his remarks. She says, Kerry Kennedy says, I strongly condemn my brother's deplorable and untruthful remarks last week about COVID being engineered for ethnic targeting. Marianne Williamson also chimes in on the debate and says, I strongly denounce comments made earlier this week by RFK Jr. implying that Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese were relatively spared by COVID-19, while Caucasians and Black people were specifically targeted, whether intentionally or not. His remarks amplify sinister and unfounded notions that are both anti-Semitic and anti-Chinese. And of course, Cenk from TYT jumps in on this as well and says, people shouldn't be surprised by RFK Jr.'s crazy anti-Semitic theory, because at the bottom of almost all conspiracy theory rabbit holes is anti-Semitism. What do you think QAnon is? They say the people secretly in charge are drinking the blood of children. That's blood libel. That's kind of an interesting statement by Cenk. Is he saying then the people secretly in charge, if he says that all conspiracy theory rabbit holes end up with anti-Semitism, and then he says that's what QAnon is, because QAnon's saying that the people who are in charge are drinking the blood of children. So he's saying that Jews are all in charge. I mean, I'm not really sure what he's saying there, but that kind of sounds, that's kind of an interesting conspiracy theory, and maybe anti-Semitic by his own definition, if he were to really stop and think about it. But going back to these, looking at Marianne Williamson's statement, for example, she says, I strongly denounce comments made earlier by RFK Jr. implying that Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese were relatively spared by COVID-19, while Caucasian and Black people were specifically targeted, whether intentionally or not, and saying his remarks amplify sinister and unfounded notions that are both anti-Semitic and anti-Chinese. So the question then one would have is why? Why would a comment saying that, first of all, COVID-19, she's saying that that he was saying these people were spared, whether intentionally or not, by COVID-19. What is wrong with that statement if it's true? Or even if it isn't true, it could be true. I don't think that there's anything, saying that a virus may be able to attack certain races or genetics or even certain genders over others or certain ages over others. Does that make you ageist if you say COVID-19 tends to affect people over the age of 75? They're the ones who are most harmed by it. Is that now ageism? Is it sexism if you say this particular virus goes after women more than men? Is that sexist? Is it, so is it then racist to say, or anti-Semitic, which is, the Jewish term for, it's racism, right? Anti-Semitism is just racism, but they're given a special name for racism. I don't think we have that for, do we have other terms like that for, like if you're anti-Chinese? Isn't that just racism? So anti-Semitism is racism. So is it racist then to say this particular virus targets certain races over others? It seems to affect certain races over others. If it's true, how is that racist? If it's true, how is that sexist? If it's true, how is it ageist? That is just factual science. So this is just another showcasing of people wanting to deny science. They don't, because it doesn't fit their narrative. The narrative being what exactly? That there's no way a virus could possibly target certain ethnicities, races, certain genders, certain ages over others, that's bigoted in some way, shape, or form. No, that's just science. And again, if you're going to be this Machiavellian, sinister character and you're wanting to wipe out an entire nation of people because you're at war with them, maybe you would be the guy that would create the bioweapon that would target that particular race of people. That's something we should be aware of, not something we should just be shielding ourselves from and saying, I don't want to. No, that's bigoted. That's racist. That's anti-Semitic. That's whatever you want to label it. It seems that we would be better off confronting it, recognizing it, studying that to find out how could we better protect ourselves in the event that there is this sinister character that's going to be trying to do something like that against us. That would be something you'd want to know. So it's interesting that rather than saying this is a scientific fact that was found by the Cleveland Clinic, instead it's been turned into this, no, you are a racist bigot if you say anything like this. So then the question is, why would that be? So now we've got people just denying science. So then why would it be anti-Semitic and anti-Chinese, as Marianne Williamson points out, as many others? She's definitely not the only one. I mean, this was like a full-on pile-on with against RFK Jr. over the weekend. What makes it anti-Semitic and anti-Chinese when you're saying that they were not as targeted by this virus, that Caucasians and Blacks were more targeted than Chinese, Jews, and Finns? And the reason behind that would be saying that, it's kind of in their minds implying that Chinese scientists or that researchers tried to spare the Chinese and spare the Jews and everybody else was going to be wiped out. It's some sort of like a negative sort of theory that, well, they were the ones, like maybe they created it in order to do that, which would be then hostile, and that would cause people to rise up, and that would then create anti-Semitism and anti-Chinese sentiments. People would rise up and say, they created a virus that spared them and targeted the rest of us. And so that would then create that animosity and create that anger. And so that's why these remarks then are being spun into, well, they're anti-Semitic and they're anti-Chinese, even though what he was really saying was quite scientific in nature. Now, you can go and debate the science. You could say, well, that's not exactly what the science is showing, or maybe different scientists could look at the virus and say, that's not really what we're not really seeing that. We dispute the claims of these scientists, not because they're disputing them because they think they're racist, not because they think, oh, this is just anti-Semitic comments, but because they're actually debating science. They're looking at the science and saying, I'm seeing something different. Right? The sun does not revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. I'm seeing something different. Scientists should be having these debates from a scientific perspective. So RFK Jr. ultimately pisses off everybody during this whole saga. Okay. So you've got first all of these people coming at him, piling on, saying he's anti-Semitic. How dare he? Look at what he's saying. His own sister saying, look at his deplorable comments that he's making. So then he decides to piss off the other half of everybody. And he has an interview with, this is Rabbi Shmuley. And Rabbi Shmuley is known as, he's like been deemed as like America's most famous rabbi. This was him back in June. Remember, he was marching during the birthday of Israel, doing marches and saying, I stand with Israel. And so people were criticizing him about this. Well, he's doubled down quite a bit, and he's made some comments that have really alarmed a lot of people with how very staunchly pro-Israel he is. But first, when he talks to Rabbi Shmuley in this interview, he addresses his comments because, again, he's being piled on, called anti-Semitic. So him and Rabbi Shmuley actually addressed the comments and what he meant by those comments. So let's hear from him directly. Here it is.
So here you are speaking at a dinner, and you say that, I watched the video, that there's a manufacturing of bioweapons going on, and COVID-19, according to a study, I think in the Cleveland Clinic, affected Ashkenazi Jews less and the Chinese less. Now, please.
Let me just put it in context. we were talking in the context of the threat of these billions of dollars in bioweapons development that is now going on in the largest countries of the world, particularly the United States, China, and Russia, and the need to regulate that, the need to resuscitate the bioweapons charter, which we signed in 1973, and the Geneva Convention that forbade a lot of that research earlier on. And for a variety of historical reasons, those are no longer complied with by these nations. And because of synthetic biology and genetic manipulation, there's a whole new retinue and generation of bioweapons. And among the worst of those are bioweapons that target ethnicities. And we all know that that is horrifically dangerous because throughout history, certain powerful people have tried to destroy races of certain ethnicities, and these bioweapons will actually give them the power to do that. So they have to be controlled. No other presidential candidate is talking about that. During that discussion, I pointed to the fact that these scientists from the Cleveland Clinic, writing in one of the highest gravitas journals in the world, published a study that showed that certain ethnicities were more susceptible to COVID-19, and certain ethnicities were less susceptible to it. Among the least susceptible were ethnic Chinese. There were also Finns are the least of all people from Finland, and on that list are also Ashkenazi Jews. The most susceptible are the most susceptible were African people of African descent and Caucasians. This is not a controversial study. Nobody has suggested that these were deliberately engineered changes, and I certainly don't believe that they were deliberately engineered. But what they are is kind of a proof of concept that you can develop bioweapons that will attack certain ethnicities, and this should be terrifying to all of us. And we really need this to be an object of discussion. What was done to me, during this, and I'm not complaining because, I don't complain, but it's an interesting phenomenon that I was tarred in a way that we call targeted propaganda. For many, many years, I've been censored on the issues that I want to talk about. This is a new kind of censorship because now everybody has to let me talk because I'm running for president. There's a new kind of censorship called targeted propaganda that is designed to make me look unpalatable, unhinged, crazy, a crank, a conspiracy theorist, and it's something that all of us really need to combat because we need, as you always say, Rabbi Shmuley, we need an open, congenial, respectful discussion in this country. We need to be able to talk about issues without being tarred, without being subject to marginalization, vilification, gaslighting, and ad hominem attacks. We need to actually have a conversation, and that conversation has to begin with an agreed upon reality. And usually that means, when it comes to the scientific realm, peer-reviewed science. So that study is important. It's important to talk about, and we should not be tarred for talking about it.
There's a couple of things that, are a little bit eyebrow raising with the study itself when we actually debate the science, rather than just saying, oh, you anti-Semite, you, for even bringing this up. One question is Africa, because Africa did really well during COVID. It was actually the continent that fared the best, and yet it's a continent full of Black people. So the notion that COVID was more damaging to Caucasians and Blacks, I think, could be disputed from a scientific level. There could be some actual scientific debate there. When he says that he doesn't believe that COVID was genetically engineered in order to spare Chinese or Jews or Finns, and he says he doesn't believe it was genetically engineered to target Caucasians and Blacks, we don't really know that. I mean, you can make that statement as a statement to try to mitigate the accusations against you, and I think that's what he's doing. He's trying to say, oh, they're saying that I claimed it was genetically engineered in order to target these groups and spare these others, and he's saying I don't believe it was genetically engineered to do that. But we actually don't really know, right? We don't even know where this thing came from legitimately yet. We don't know. We don't have any definitive proof that it came from the lab or that it came from a bat. We definitely have our suspicions. We have evidence that points in a certain direction, but we don't really have any solid evidence. So if we don't have the solid evidence for certain that it came from a lab and that it was developed in a lab, we also don't have any solid evidence as to what they were doing when they were doing the gain of function research. And it very well could have been that they were doing the gain of function research to see if it would affect certain races over others. We don't know. So look, if people want to call me and smear me as anti-Semitic for making this statement, the scientific factual statement, then fine. But I do believe we should be staying factual and scientific in these, in these discussions, and not then resorting to these sorts of low-level smears. Now, what really got RFK Jr. into even more trouble with a different group, with those who are way more skeptical of Israel's policies, people who are very wary, just really wary of the U.S.'s partnership with Israel. It just seems that so many politicians must pledge allegiance to Israel. They must support Israel. If they criticize Israel, they're smeared as anti-Semitic. If they question the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel, they're called anti-Semitic. There is an obvious and profound link between the United States and Israel that is inexplicable for many of us. We don't understand what is so special. Why this nation? Why are we able to criticize Saudi Arabia, for example, but not Israel? Why are we able to criticize? It's almost like the passion that many in the United States have for Ukraine is like amped up when it comes to Israel. Though Ukraine might be coming in hot, with like, you must support Ukraine, you must have pledge allegiance to Ukraine, and how dare you criticize or question anything at all. But RFK Jr. has come out very much staunchly in support of Israel. In the past, he's made comments that were people were thinking, wow, is he really a humongous supporter of Israel? And now he's made even stronger statements. So this is what he says to Rabbi Shmuley in this conversation about Israel that's upset so many people. Here it is. I want to tell you about 4patriots.com. It's a company that is dedicated to helping Americans prepare for whatever comes their way, whether it's a natural disaster, another pandemic, or even just supplies to get you through summer and winter. 4Patriots has the products you need. They offer a wide range of survival gear like thermal blankets, generators, and water filtration kits. They also have many choices of survival food kits that range in size from 72-hour kits to a 1-year supply of food. So if you're worried about this summer's heat, they also have a solar generator that will help prevent you from having to endure rolling blackouts. They even sell a really nice little portable air machine. They also have home and garden and camping gear. So check it out at 4patriots.com. Use the promo code Kim at checkout for 10% off your order.